Hey, welcome to Labor Goes to the Movies with me, Chris Garlock, director of the DC Labor Film Fest, and as always, my sister in cinematic solidarity, Elise Bryant, executive director of the Labor Heritage Foundation. Our guest this week is director Mark Street, whose latest film is the wonderful Work Songs. It features interviews with cab drivers, longshore-women, a farmer, a barista from California to New York City. It's inspired by the work of the great Studs Terkel. Work Songs is a kaleidoscopic portrait of the United States at work as we face threats from automation, the gig economy, and the decline of unions. It's a pretty wide-ranging conversation. As usual, think you're going to enjoy it. Here's the show.
Are you poor, forlorn, and hungry? Are there lots of things you lack? Is your life made up of this?
No matter what Uber does, we're going nowhere. We're here to stay.
Now I produce video games, and I never fully clock out.
My father was a longshoreman, and when I was 18, I got to carry on that legacy. So I'm fourth generation longshoreman.
The Wobblies, I've always said, I don't mind the machine, I just don't want to be its victim.
I didn't have a high school degree, and nobody would hire me at that point.
You're constantly reminded that you're the woman woodworker. Just want to clear a path for girls that might be interested but don't feel like the world is saying it's for them.
I have the privilege of participating in land redemption. It's really, really satisfying.
I want everyone to get across safely, let everyone feel special. I take it with so much pride and so much love.
Sipping off you ornery duffers and dump the bosses off your back.
Welcome to Labor Goes to the Movies, Mark. Good to have you here.
Great. This is audio only, right?
No. You're on camera, baby.
Oh gosh.
We released two versions, the audio version and the visual. Did you want to go do your hair now? And
I don't think there's anything to do to my hair, but I will take off
the t-shirt. Yeah.
Oh.
There you go.
Put on my business t-shirt. How's that?
You're
the Bronx.
You're a cyclist or a runner?
I want to be there.
A cyclist.
Cyclist.
The Tour de Bronx, not to be.
So sorry. All right. So this is, you can tell, is a pretty free-flowing, no holds bar. We just talk about whatever. The question that we've wound up starting asking people is, Mark, what is your earliest memory of a movie?
That is such a good question. My earliest memory of a movie. I remember some biopic about Churchill, of all people, at a theater in downtown Beloit, Wisconsin, where I grew up. And it was very much on site and, Saturday afternoon at the movies. And it I don't know, it stuck with me for some reason. Sort of a dry biopic or something, but I was intrigued by the by the activity of sitting in a theater, which I haven't been able to do in a long time, but I'm an avid movie attender, and I look forward to doing it again when it's safe.
That actually, we didn't get to this yesterday, but let's get to it now, which is especially as a film goer, and all three of us obviously are, but also for you as a filmmaker, talk about the difference between seeing a film in a theater with other people and seeing it at home on your couch.
Well, I just feel like the obvious things are it's more immersive, right? And it's more detached from your daily life. We all surround ourselves with trappings, things that make us feel comfortable. My bicycle, my walls are painted the way I want them to be painted. I'm safe, I'm at home. If I'm viewing a film at home, it's within the theater that I've created within my bourgeois Brooklyn lifestyle, if you will, right? If I go out to a theater, I'm in public and I'm receiving it in a much more public space. And obviously we could talk about movie prices and how it's expensive to go to the movies, but I feel like you're meeting something halfway in a public domain. And there isn't the social interdiction on leaving. If you watch something at home, I just watched a great Ken Loach film.
Which one?
My Name is Joe. Love it. But I watched half of it 2 nights ago and then half of it yesterday, right? In a way, it sort of truncates and atomizes the experience. It's something you can't do in the theater. So I think, it's really wonderful to be here talking about the movies, but I really miss the festival circuit. I really miss being in the audience, shared experience with people looking at my films and others and answering questions in a live context.
I got more questions, but I'm gonna yield the floor to Elise.
I have to ask, what was the word after truncated?
Yeah, atomized.
Atomized, yeah.
Atomized.
Made into smaller units or something. We're all at home. There's a very sad commercial. I still watch network news, which shows my age. But there's a very sad commercial for Verizon or one of these cellular companies, and there's a family, and the premise of the commercial is we'll give you enough firepower so that everyone can watch what she wants on her own device. You see the father watching sports, and you see the mother watching whatever she's watching, and you see the kids playing video games. And it's supposed to be this argument for largesse of service. And I see a family that's split into a million directions, not sucking it up and watching the same thing or something, But anyway,
Right.
Grumpy Old Man comment number 526.
It's the atoms of the nuclear family.
The Adams
separated.
The Adams family. How's that?
So I wonder, that your first film that you recall is a documentary had any impact on your decision to become a documentarian?
It wasn't a documentary. It was a biopic.
Biopic. Sorry.
Biopic. But I remember, reviewing
a biopic about Churchill in what, the 60s?
Yeah, it would have been 1970 or so.
That's 70.
Yeah, it was weird. It was. I should look that up. Formative.
Because I can't recall. I'm like trying to place the film and.
Yeah, I'm sure it went nowhere. It would have gone straight to video had video existed. I'm sure. But it's interesting. I remember reviewing Apocalypse Now from my high school newspaper, and I liked it at the time, and might have some issues with it now. But anyway, whatever. I thought it was a good movie. But I remember thinking that film, with the cast of thousands and millions of dollars, and shot in Thailand and all that. That's so far from any kind of experience, from any kind of personal agency. I can't see even Francis Ford Coppola in that movie, right? I couldn't see the artistry. All I could see was the personal artistry, right? All I could see was the sort of Hollywood mechanism. And then when I went off to Bard College, I started to look at movies that were more personal movies, that were more about one person's vision, one person's thought. So that's really where I made the leap between what I could do as a filmmaker, which is very I would say low to the ground, humble, it's just going out with a camera and shooting, basically. And these sort of large Hollywood productions that you can do it on your own terms, and you can do it in, sort of less, less grand ways, and it's just as powerful to me.
You mentioned yesterday you're a professor.
Yeah, I teach at Fordham University here in New York, and I teach in the art department, not the communications department, but I teach filmmaking in the art department, the visual arts department, alongside photography, graphic design, architecture, etc. So again, filmmaker as artist, in a lot of my films, there's, obviously I thank people and I have a crew, but it's sort of a one person thing akin to a poem or a novel or a short story or something like that.
That was my feeling of work songs. It felt very, very personal, and it had to me a bit of a road trip feel. I don't know when you had said you actually. I don't think it actually is sequential, and you played around. You talked about that. You played around with the sequencing of it, and it does. But they are a series of vignettes, but it had this feeling of you sort of going along and thinking, oh, this would be an interesting person to talk to. It didn't feel like you started out with you had a plan in terms of you were inspired by Studs Terkel's book Working, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
But from there, so to call it a plan might be a little more than really was, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I think these documentaries I make are cumulative. You shoot something. Also, to me, this is sort of an artist's thing too, right? The line between pre-production and production and post-production is permeable. So rather than, let's just say, writing a grant proposal saying I'm going to go do this, then you go shoot it and then you edit it. I'll shoot a little bit, edit a little bit, figure out what I need, go back into the field, shoot a little bit more, and keep the process alive in that way. But I appreciate what you're saying about the road trip, because that's really the way I saw it, a cinematic road trip. Going to these places, talking to people in formal and informal ways, and seeing the country as a whole, and sort of considering what how things might be different in the Northeast than in the South and things like that.
So you were inspired by Studs, Terkel's Working. That he's a very particular interviewer. What was your idea about how to do that in film?
What's interesting is I sort of learned along the way that less prepared is better. I don't know what your experience, Chris, with all the media, Chris and Elise, all the media you do, but you have 1,000,001 questions, and it sort of over determines the answers in some ways. I think the first few interviews I did, I had a big legal pad and I was bound up in these questions. And then as I moved along, it's more about listening to people, right? It's more about letting them talk. It's more about letting them go where they want to go and building the questions on each other. But I want to say something else about place in response to your last question, Chris, and that is that a lot of my work, experimental, narrative, and otherwise, starts with location, starts with place. I made a film called Rockaway. It's an improvised feature shot out in the Rockaways here in New York and Queens, which is it's what you pass over when you're flying into JFK, thin strip of land out there. It's kind of like where the city meets the suburbs or the suburbs meet the city or something like that. Very strange, isolated place. I made a feature film called Hasta Nunca, Spanish language improvised feature in Montevideo, Uruguay. And it's a place I just loved, right? So I went there and I kept going back and I cast the film there and worked with non-actors there. But it starts with place and moves outward, which sort of, rather than saying I have a story and I want to find out where I can put it, I sort of start with a place and let the story emanate from that place.
Well, that was my question. It's like, how'd you choose place and how'd you choose subjects?
Well, I started in Pittsburgh because I thought it was emblematic of, of a certain kind of change in labor from a Rust Belt city that is trying to reinvent itself as a clean technology hub in a sort of unholy alliance between Carnegie Mellon, the city of Pittsburgh, and Uber, right? So it's this weird academic, public, private thing. And by the way, automatic vehicle technology comes from the military, comes from the defense. So there's that shadow in the whole thing. So I thought, let me just go there for 10 days. And, I did some formal interviews with the sort of guru of automatic vehicles who ended up on the cutting room floor with some city officials and people on the street. So, I try to be somewhat planned and somewhat spontaneous. There's an interview with the parking garage attendant in the film. By the way, his job, in the utopian view of automatic vehicles, his job is gone, right? We don't park vehicles anymore. They circulate 24/7, which is not a terrible idea. So much space is being used to house vehicles. But it means his job is gone, right? So I just said, let's go to this parking garage over here and let's grab this guy and, set up the camera and ask him a few questions. So, the beginning of the film was really a mix between the sort of sit down interview like we're doing here, and let's put ourselves somewhere where, interesting people appear to be around, and let's ask them very direct questions. I made a film in 2000.
I just want to back up for a minute. Did you do the same thing with the cab driver?
Yeah, I just got
a random.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, thanks for saving me from my digression.
Okay.
I just found we got in a cab and we kept calling Ubers hoping to get an automatic one, and that didn't work. So we ended up, cab drivers is another job that will be gone, based on the Uber technology. So I remember I think it was something like, hey, would you talk to us? And the cab driver said, oh, you got to talk to Charles. Charles is a character. So Charles called his boss, and his boss said, it's all right with me. And, we just got this cab and interviewing people in cars is great. You should try it, Chris. It's great because they're sort of in the world and also in their private space in some weird way. I don't know about the technology, but some documentarians swear by car interviews. So this guy's driving, he's not self-conscious because he's concentrated on driving. And he was just, he was great. I loved him.
There's a nice juxtaposition between him and the executive who was, praising the automatic cars. And how
yeah. One was, way more sort of just fun and human and real, So.
But you did that throughout the film. So the UPS driver versus the person who was driving a tanker, I think it was,
Yeah, that was an immediate spontaneous interview. The UPS guy was sort of 6 degrees of separation. When I was out in California, I just sort of put feelers out. And, it's such work, as you know. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Everybody's got something to say about it, right? Everybody but people who have inherited all their money. Everybody's had a job. And, if you make your pitch, my pitch, very wide and very focused, tell us about your work, people can respond. Not everybody, but
is that the pitch?
Yeah, I'm making a film about work. What intrigues you about it? What are your disappointments? What are your how's it changed over time?
Right. Yeah.
What's the weirdest job you ever had? I said this yesterday. You sit around and people have had 2 or 3 glasses of wine, and it's 11 o'clock at night, if people ever get together again. And, people will talk for hours. They're, oh man, I had this weird job and I got fired and this thing happened. And, so anyway.
All right, wait. So what's the weirdest job you ever had besides documentarian?
Well, I wrote a companion essay. I had to go way back and look at all these things I've done over the years. I actually phone solicited for this place called Olin Mills. And
yeah.
Remember them? And
photographer. Yeah.
And they set up in a hotel room, and then they cold call, they used to, out of the phone book. And then they say, we're going to come back to this hotel and we're going to do, you prepay, and then you come back and you get your family portrait or whatever. So my boss was this woman, Vera. That was her stage name. Her phone name. She's been doing it for like 30 years. And, this is a job I got out of the classified section, the Beloit Daily News in Beloit, Wisconsin. So we sat in this hotel room 3 16-year-olds and Vera. And she literally bought us gin and tonics from the bar at the hotel. We're 16, you know, and did this calling. You know, I remember once, and her voice purred. She'd been at this forever. She was sort of like a female Willie Loman, you know, always on the road, you know. But anyway, one time I called this woman, and she said, "Oh, a family portrait. Oh, you know, my husband has terminal cancer." I said, "Look, I'm so sorry. I am just so sorry. You know, my best to you. You're in my thoughts." And I hung up. And Vera turned to me, and she was so mad. She said, "Mark, that's when you go in and you say, all the better time to get a family portrait."
Closing. Always be closing, man. Always be closing. What were you thinking?
What was I thinking? No more gin and tonics for me.
or maybe more gin and tonics for you.
Thank you, Chris. Yes.
Yeah.
Elise, I'm just thinking about Elise has a lot of theater background, and I'm not a theater person, but I'm thinking I really like your technique because you know, for all of my shows, you know, I do a little bit of preparation, but I'm with you. I feel like when you over prepare, you wind up with a list of questions that you feel like you worked hard on, so you better ask them. And even if the interviews go a completely different direction, which they almost always do. And so at least I'm thinking that this feels like a bit of a theater thing too, as well, right? I mean, more of a theater technique in terms of improvisation, which tends not to happen so much in film because, well, at least up until recently, because of, you know, you're talking about a lot of money and people and crews and, you know, the kind of thing that you're talking about, Mark, is not, it sounds problematic from a professional point of view, but maybe I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the value of being a sort of, you know, single entity. You know, again, I hired some people I went to school with. I knew them really well out in San Pedro, California, and they were hip to this idea of just driving around and looking, and I didn't feel like I had to know what I was doing at every moment, which is important, you know. But most of what I do, I just go out by myself, you know, and that means I'm not beholden to some large expenditure on crew or, you know, it's almost a capitalist idea, you know, like I've invested in these questions, Chris, you were saying, you know, I've invested my labor into this, I better get something out of it, right? Whereas if you're more improvisational, you can be, you know, light on your feet, I always say, you know, close to the ground. You can follow the ideas where they take you. I made a film called Happy in 1999, which is a remake of The Pretty Month of May by Chris Marker, which itself is a remake of Chronicles of a Summer by Jean Rouch. Those films approached people on the street and asked them if they were happy. That's it. Are you happy? And of course, Chris Marker's film ends up to be about the, you know, it's the streets of Paris, and he uses the streets of Paris as a sort of site location. People are talking about the war in Indochina. How can I be happy when people are being killed in Indochina and things like that before the French got out? But anyway, Happy. I just walked up to people on the street in New York, different boroughs, different times of day, different locations, and said, "Excuse me, are you happy?" No introduction, no pitch, nothing, you know.
And you didn't get arrested?
Didn't get arrested. One woman, you know, the thing about New York is people would either say things I can't say on air to me.
But actually, no, you can say whatever. It's a podcast. So
and say, "Fuck you."
That's New York. I know that's what they said.
Or they'd talk to me. There was no in between.
Right, right.
I tried out in San Francisco once. I said, "Let me make this a global thing." And I loved San Francisco. I lived there for many years. But San Francisco, I did like 3 interviews, and I put the camera in someone's face and says, "Hey, are you happy?" "Excuse me, what right have you to invade my personal space?" You know, there's this long litigious thing about personal space and stuff like that. Whereas in New York, they're like, get out of my face, fuck you, or let's talk for like an hour, you know. I could send you a link to that film.
I'd love to see that. That sounds great.
And I learned something too about spontaneity and improvisation, and that is that I was cutting the film, and it was fairly diverse from a socioeconomic standpoint, but it was not diverse from a gendered standpoint. And I was trying to figure out why. This is mid post-production. Why is that? Well, that's because I don't feel comfortable being assertive with women, walking up to women with a camera in the way that I do with men.
Right.
You know, so the film is suffering for that. And nor should I feel assertive with women on the street. It's, you know what I mean? Like I have to figure out a way of getting some women in here, you know, and I don't know consciously what I did, but I definitely went out and said, I gotta figure out a way of you know, getting more women's voices in there and maybe not being so assertive in there, you know. But it was interesting, you know, people would say, I could have said I'm a professor, I could have said this is my film, I could have said this is something that interests me, but I wanted the question to go in right away. And a lot of people would answer it, they go, am I happy? Jesus, no one's ever asked me that, you know. Well, you know, I'm happy, you know. Yeah, I'm happy in this way. Hey, what is this for? You know, like they muse around and they say, well, then what's your, you know, how are you tethered to society in asking this question? And I would just say it's a film I'm making. So anyway.
Well, the two sisters were, I mean, they were in the film.
Love them.
I was just like, now where did they come from? Now they were you walking down the street, you see two sisters and they happen to be, you know,
longshoremen,
union members, you know, descended from their father, and the whole, it was fascinating.
Yeah, they were great. And, you know, one was a former school teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And I think since then, one has retired. I think dock working and longshoremen, which they call themselves.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think it's a little bit like the military in that people go in, they put in 20 years, and then they go do something else with their life. I discovered this. I made a film called Oiltowns about oil workers, and it was similar. Right? It was like people would go in for 20 years, make good money, do something else. Or they'd come from the military. You know, they put in 20 years in the military, 10 years working in North Dakota, and then keel over, I guess. But it's a lot of work, you know?
Yeah.
Hard work.
Hard work. And it's a lot of separation from family with the oil workers. They have these, what they call them man camps, Steinbeckian, you know, barracks. You know, so these men are sleeping next to each other there. They're working 3 weeks on, 1 week off, you know, sending the money home or not, you know. And
whoever's got the oil rules the world, basically is what it boils down to.
Trying to make money to support our families and just get a better life. A lot of individuals come out with a lot of heart and drive to work and do a better job for America.
Well, gas prices are rising. Barrel of oil prices are rising, and no matter what, we need what's under the ground here.
My 5th day out here, I got a job. 2 weeks later, I got another job, so that worked out real good.
People think that, you know, you can go to Williston or go to North Dakota and make a bunch of money, but the thing with that comes high rent. My grandmother that lived over here in these trailers, they kept raising her rent just about every single month. She's 80 years old, and, you know, they're just pushing people right out of their homes.
It was like somebody flicked the light switch. One day it's extremely super busy, and like the next day it's rather quiet. Almost back to like the days before the oil came.
We lost about 30 rigs, so you know, we lost a lot of people that we knew, and there's people selling furniture on the side of the road. In fact, yesterday I saw a guy had all of his furniture in the parking lot selling it at cheap prices so he could get out of town.
How long you figure you'll be up here?
I'm leaving today.
Anyway, how did I get off on this? You asked a good question, Elise, and I butchered it.
Other two women, and how you encountered them.
Pardon me?
The sisters.
The sisters, how I encountered them.
Yeah.
Eric Sachs is a really great filmmaker, and he helped me shoot out there. He had lived in Pedro. Yeah, they call it Pedro, even though it's spelled Pedro. Took me a long time to get that right. And then I met one woman in the course of making this film. And she said, I call it Pedro. And I was like, Oh my God. I've spent all this time training myself to say Pedro. Now it's Pedro for you. Anyway, he knew them. It's a small, tight-knit community. He knew them. He called them up and he said, can we do this interview? So that was it, 2 days of separation. Or
Network.
And
One of the things I was thinking, Mark, about your technique is that, when it's just you, and it sort of goes to the idea about interviewing people in cars, I think, although I think people are obviously a lot more comfortable, being on camera now than they were, certainly, a generation ago. But I think if it's just you with a camera, or maybe you and one other person, it's a lot less invasive. I think people might be more comfortable. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, it's an interesting trade-off. On one hand, they respect you less, right? And I've shown up by myself or with one other person. They're like, "This is it," they had this vision of people running around getting coffee or whatever.
Where's the light guy? Where's the makeup person?
Exactly. Yeah. So maybe it tips your hand or my hand as a kind of independent operator. But I think ultimately there's less mediation, right? I think ultimately it can be more conversational. I'm not pretending that the apparatus of filmmaking doesn't affect what they're going to say, doesn't make people self-conscious or whatever. But I'm less nervous, and I think it's more direct. Look at us here, right? Think about what this would look like if it was less informal or more formal, and there were technicians running around or something. This is very direct. I love it.
Get you on a panel. We were just talking about that. Those are the dreaded panel discussions. It's just a nightmare. But and this is a variation on the question, and we want to get into, because actually Elise had some really interesting afterthoughts on the whole labor film question. But one of the things that I was wondering about as a filmmaker, and I've been dealing with this a lot through there's some really amazing editing tools now for both sound and video that can make even people like myself, who are not professional editors, but can do amazing things in terms of, like taking out all the ums and the ahs, for example. And so you have to deal with this, as a filmmaker, right? What do you leave in? What do you take out? What do you maybe move around? And I come from a journalism background, so I'm very nervous about doing that sort of thing, right? I mean, to me, I have a lot of commitment to what people actually say, even though people don't usually talk in really, they don't talk as good as we write, let's say.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So as a filmmaker, how do you, as a documentary filmmaker, but also somebody who's making more artistic documentaries, what's your thought on dealing with that? Editing, moving things around, stuff like that.
I think you have to trust yourself on some level, right? And you have to make it cohesive. And I certainly don't speak logically, right? I'm interjecting things, I'm digressing. And, I had a couple people help me in editing. It's great to have fresh eyes. And they would come in and they would say, well, hold it. This person starts by saying this, but then says this. What if we just flip that around? It doesn't change what they're saying. It just makes for a rhetorical unity or a rhetorical arc, in the same way when if you're writing a print article, you might rearrange the quotes for somebody and actually make them sound better or something.
Right.
So I just said I'm conscious.
We'll take it out later.
Take that out later, right? Exactly.
I think it's interesting because I was thinking about this before, and we were talking about the interview process. That stream of consciousness is what happens when you don't have the prescribed, these are the 3 questions I'm going to ask you, right? And in allowing people to go in their stream of consciousness, I think they are more creative.
Yes.
And it makes sense because this is with Workers' Lives, Workers' Stories. When I started the labor theater troupe at the University of Michigan Labor Study Center, I found that when people wrote their stories, they were we went to the house, we were very happy, our whole family. But when I said, tell me your story, and I recorded it, then I could go back and patch it together and say, this is what you said, but here's a different order, right? Because this was really strong, and you said this at the end, and then you said this in the middle, and I put, and they went with it, and they were able to memorize it because it came from them.
So interesting. Yeah. I like the idea of stream of consciousness, or of, letting people muse,
Yes. Yes.
I showed this film in a class at UC Berkeley, taught by a friend of mine, Jeffrey Scholar. And he was asking me about the psychoanalytic properties of the interview, right? Letting people talk, what are you opening up for them? What is that process like? And I don't have much to say about it, except that I think it's interesting. An interview is an opportunity to go somewhere someone hasn't gone before, psychologically. I also think, Michel Foucault talks about the difference between an interview and a conversation, right? An interview is based on a power imbalance. Chris, I want you to say this. Elise, I'm going to ask you a question and you're going to answer it. A conversation, which is more what we're having today, it short circuits those power imbalances, and it allows unexpected things to come to the fore. So I'm not abdicating my power as a filmmaker, but I'm hoping that in certain spots I achieved a conversation with the subjects of the film, where they were able to ask me and talk back and things like that.
Well, I think there's also a key point that you made earlier too, that I want to appreciate in this context, is listening.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because the first impression we learn is to be seen and not heard. And you're going to the average person in the street doing their job and saying, I want to listen to what you have to say, engaging in that relationship. So that comes across in the film.
Thank you, Elise. There's no higher compliment. Listen, think about all the classes about communicating, about speaking well. I teach at a Jesuit university. It's all about communicating your ideas clearly, thoughtfully. They call it eloquentia perfecta, the perfect word, whatever. That's all great. Why the hell are we not talking about listening? Right? Why are we not listening? Communications. Let's get a whole academic department about empathy and listening and shutting my hell up, and which I should do right now, and getting people, to actively listen to each other.
Well,
that's what we do in the films, right? I mean, we're listening, and that's a principal thing you're doing when you're watching film, and you're taking it in, but it's also you have to hear it.
And one of the reasons I knew Elise was gonna love this film, besides the fact that it's just a great film, but the title, Work Songs. And I want you to talk about that, and I want Elise to talk about that, because it was with that title, I had a different idea about what it would be, but it is absolutely the right title. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, and I do want to get Elise to react to it as well.
Sure. Came to the title pretty late. I don't remember what working titles I had, but they weren't as good. I guess I had this wobbly song, which is literally a work song, and I put it over the labor historian from San Pedro, Art Morales, great guy who wrote a book on the wobblies. And I thought I had that in there, and then I thought, well, these interviews are sort of they're like individual tracks on an album, on an LP, which I used to buy. Or a CD, which I still buy, and they're each unto themselves. They're each idiosyncratic. They're each maybe articulate as little snippets, and then they're cumulative, right? So these can be a collection of work songs. Some are 2 minutes, some are 8 minutes. Some are extended, some are kind of light, some are deep, some are dark. These are a collection of little entities. So that's the way I thought about it. Elise, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I was thinking in the classic sense of the Greek chorus, right? And a song wasn't necessarily set to music. A song would be a poem or a collection of words. And so when I saw the title Work Song, that's what I thought of.
So interesting. That's a great thought. I love that. I love us as the audience just listening.
And I think that's why, somebody who loved, Studs Terkel can interview a telephone book and it would be great, but Studs was a great listener. That was his secret, right? That he was not afraid to follow it. And so to me, that you were really true to Studs Terkel's, that everybody has a story. And this idea, and it makes sense to me when you talk about an album, because it is when I was thinking about the film, about these different pieces, I had the feeling like you could have tossed all those segments up and put them in a different way, and it would be a different film. And I think it would still work. I'm sure it's the best the way it is, because it's your vision. But just as with a certain, some albums tell a story and they have a beginning, a middle, and an end. I don't know that they really do that anymore, do they?
That's a good point. The Kinks used to do that a lot. Sort of there's a name for that. I don't remember what it is, but sort of like an opera.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, nobody does it anymore.
Queen did that too, actually.
Yeah,
Queen,
right.
Yeah. It definitely did, but I'm not sure. Probably because I don't really listen to CDs anymore. It's all individual, which goes to your initial point about atomizing. That is really something that's going on now with all of the personal. We're watching movies individually, and I really. A lot of people, I think we're all sort of getting to the end of our rope with this long pandemic, shut in, and we all are just hankering for that. This is great. I think we've all gotten an appreciation for being able to see each other over Zoom. It's certainly better than, God forbid, a conference call. But at least,
God forbid. For real, God forbid.
And but Elise and Elise and I go to a lot of movies together, and Elise always talks about. Well, you should talk about it. What happens when we're physically in the same space? The breathing the air, the same air, which of course we don't want to do that at the moment. But you have this point about how it's different when we are sharing that space and the air and the vibrations. I don't know. You put it better than I do.
Are you talking to me or are you talking to Mark?
I'm talking to you.
Oh, okay. Well, you basically said it. That's it. And I was thinking about that earlier when we were talking about the experience of going in the theater. It did make me wonder, though, was it an extroverted thing or introverts? Do introverts feel the same way about the experience? I don't know. But I do know that it is that dynamic. Literally, it is the sound waves, it's the energy, it's breathing together. But what I wanted to talk about, this all made me think about in stream of consciousness, was the whole thing about the documentary versus the feature film.
That's right. Yeah, go lay it on, because I want to get Mark to. She calls me up and leaves me this message after the meeting yesterday. And just for folks that weren't there, this is we were at the Global Labor Film Festival Organizers Network meeting yesterday that Mark came and talked to, and thank you for doing that. But I kind of went on my little mini rant about my frustration with these reenactments that folks are dumping into documentaries that confuse me. I got and Mark, to your point, and then also interspersing them with these expert interviews, which I'm very glad that you left those on the cutting room floor. I don't think they really help, but at least then called afterwards with a whole other take on it.
Yeah, I think here's where it started with, in listening to this conversation, is the voice of working class people is not heard. The authentic voice of working class people is not heard. And when I think about the film 9 to 5 with Dolly and Jane and Lily versus the documentary 9 to 5, it's like, it's a totally different story. It's just like, and I know this from the experiences, that when people hear their own stories told, when they hear their voices told, it's like there's something that happens. And I don't want to use the word empowerment, but there's something that happens in that relationship. And that's what happens in your film.
Well,
but the whole thing about the star thing is like, you're going to get more star power if you thrown in Will Smith, okay, or something, or had Tom Hanks narrated, right? As opposed to just the story as it is in the moment and putting it together to make a film. So feature versus documentary versus Hollywood.
Well, I think there's I was going to say this yesterday, but it didn't come to me fast enough. There is such a thing as a hybrid documentary fiction film, right? I think what you're talking about, Chris, in reenactment, of course, Errol Morris does it
right
all the time in The Thin Blue Line and other films like that. You know, like in an essay film, there could be documentary elements and fictional elements that are sort of mixed together in a way which I find kind of interesting. But what you're talking about, a little bit of Chris is fooling people, right? Sort of, you know, is it real or is it Memorex kind of thing? If you're old enough to remember that commercial with Ella Fitzgerald, you know, singing, they would have her, remember this commercial? They had, you know, Ella singing, and then they recorded it on Memorex cassette tape. Boy, I really sound old, don't I? And then they played it back, and you're supposed to figure out whether it's the real Ella or the recorded Ella. But anyway, Jean-Luc Godard said all films are documentaries. Some are just documentaries of actors playing parts. So you know, in some ways you could expand the definition of documentary, or you could mix it up a little bit. But I think I'm trying to think of examples of hybrid documentary, but I think that there are some films that don't purport to reenact, right? That sort of say, here's a documentary section and here's a fiction section, and we're going to mix them together and let the audience untangle them. What you're talking about is something different, Chris. It's sort of like a documentary with a little fictional embellishment or something, you know?
Well, what I'm reacting to is a couple of things. I mean, the overall context that I'm reacting to is that one of the big things going on in our country, in the world right now, is this whole question of what is authentic. And I think that's what Elise and I are both reacting to with your film. I mean, for all we know, you hired all these people, paid them, it's all scripted. I don't think so. You know, it really feels authentic. Like you said yesterday, you know, one of those people was, you know, you had a performance, you went across the street to the bar, the bartender was interesting, you interviewed the bartender, right? That's that story, you know, that sounds like how you made the film, you know, like you just found these folks, right? You know, but then you have people like that right winger, James somebody or other, who goes and, you know, uses hidden cameras and then re-edits that stuff to make it look completely different than what it was, because he has a political agenda, right? And so I think that is a real, and so when you see things that purport to be documentaries that then interweave, you know, let's do some reenactments here, let's dress some people up in period costume, you know, just because we have a whole bunch of money to do that, and it doesn't actually do anything except, you know, sort of make it look sexier or flashier or whatever, you know, that does not feel authentic to me. And I think that's what at least I'm reacting to is, you know, I really like a film like yours where I feel, you know, and you didn't cut out your questions a lot of times. We can hear you off camera asking the questions, which is normally something I'm not a fan of. But because it's clearly a lot of times just you with your camera, like how else were you going to do that? Right? I mean,
yeah, I think that's a very central question for documentarians. I always tell my students, are you in it or are you not? Right? Are you a character? Are you Michael Moore or are you not Michael Moore? Are you pretending to be the voice of God as an omniscient off-screen presence, or are you a character? And if you are a character, you have to be a character, right? You have to create a character. So I actually consciously went back and put those questions back in. I cut them out. And then I think on the 10th or 11th or 12th edit, I said, look, I gotta be in there. And if I'm in there, I have to have a presence. You know, I can't just be a placeholder. And the presence I hope to create was of this sort of puckish interviewer, you know, hey, can I ask you a couple questions? Mind if I talk to you for a minute? sort of underlying the spontaneity of the film and the kind of improvisation, happenstance. There's no justice in documentary. You can stand on a street corner for 48 hours and get nothing. And then you can go the next day and set up your camera, and a beautiful human being walks by who will tell you her life story, right? And you have a whole film out of it, and you just have to be open to those kind of risks, I think, in some ways. But it's interesting, Chris, when you talk about authenticity and truth value, and I don't even want to use the term, fake news because of where it came from, but I guess I just did. But anyway, it's interesting. I have these Facebook friends from Wisconsin, some very conservative and some populist, some not really conservative, but kind of sort of all over the map. And I keep them because it's a view into out of my bubble, right? But they're always posting things that are some of them are posting things that are curious to me. And one posted something the other day, and I think it sort of speaks to your concerns about authenticity. And it was sort of a meme or something that he'd received, and he was resharing. And it said, "When I was little, I was told not to believe everything I heard. Now I know not to believe anything I hear." And I sort of thought, well, they've got us, right? If they if they can spread all this disinformation to the point where people don't know what's up or what's down or what's real or what's not, what is truth value? What are facts? Right. What is science? What is, can you look at the video of the insurrection riot at the Capitol and just believe your damn eyes? You should be able to, as the prosecutors asked at the Derek Chauvin trial. Look at the video of this horrible thing happening, believe your eyes, right? It really is real. It's not trumped up. It's not, inauthentic. It is a fact, and I think the cloud and the smoke around facts has been, the smoke machine, the fog machine has been ramped up. So I get it.
No, but I think you're that's exactly what we're concerned about is that it's a real poison the well kind of a thing. I mean, they've been doing it for years, just trying to poison the well politically, and I feel like that's happening now with actually the Chauvin case is a perfect example. The defense is trying to tell you that what you think you're saying is not what you think you're saying, right? Like if you look at it from the right angle, his knee is actually not on his neck, and I'm like, that's the point at which you completely lost me now. If you can convince me that it does remind me of Trump saying, don't believe what you say. But I do want to sort of wrap up with a question about why film, right? I mean, clearly you're an artist. I'm sure that there are other arts that you could choose. What is so useful, important, valuable about film? And when we talk about film, and we mean film, video. I mean these kind of, but for the purposes of this film.
I really appreciate what Elise said earlier about her experience of feeling like people were heard in this film. And I felt like video and audio together allowed them to be full, is all I can say, on the screen. I'm thinking about that gentleman in Bisbee, Arizona with the hat on, right? Who talks about passing on his skills as a laborer to his sons and things like that. Or the man in LA who, immigrant, worked his way up, owns his own car shop, etc. He's a full human being, right? Film allows us to hear him and see his uncomfortability, see his mannerisms, all those things. So I just really felt like I wanted to paint a full picture of people in place, right? They call it B-roll footage. who is it? One of the documentarians says, none of my footage is B-roll. It's all A-roll. Anyway, to me, film allows me to paint a full picture. And it's something I feel I can do on my own. A lot of times, even when I was working with the crew, I hired a local crew in Pittsburgh, which is where I started the film, which is where I was most terrified, because you never know whether anything is going to come out. I don't know what your experience is like as creators, but you're like, I never know what I'm doing, and is this real or not, So I was terrified in Pittsburgh, and I would work with a crew, and you always have to have some measure of appearing to maybe know what you're doing a little bit if you're hiring someone. But then they'd go home and I'd just take my camera out at night and, set it up. And that's where we are technologically these days, right? I mean, you were saying this earlier, Chris. You can get a camera for $500 and you can get some editing software, and my students do it every day. Come up with an idea at 9 o'clock, shoot it at 10 o'clock, edit it at 12:30. Class starts at 2:30. It's fine. It's very immediate, And interestingly enough, I think that we're fortunate in that way, right? We're not tied to large, institutions, but I think it leads, and I'll just return to my theme, to more loneliness too. When I first graduated from undergraduate, I moved out to San Francisco. And I had to join an organization in order to rent equipment and edit on a 16mm flatbed. And I needed that community. And I loved it. It was called Film Arts Foundation in the 80s in San Francisco. Now my students graduate, their parents give them a camera and a laptop, well, they should, for graduation. And they're alone in their apartment, maybe. You got to go out and find that community. So I'm not arguing that film should be more expensive or that this technology shouldn't make things easier for us. It does, but it also puts us in our little bubbles as well.
No, I think that's absolutely right, that you don't have that community. And the other thing I was thinking, Mark, I think it's arguable, and I think other people have made this argument, Black Lives Matter would not be possible without the fact, all of this film of these things happening, right? That have been happening for years and years and years. But no, that didn't happen, right? I mean, and now we've got film, right? And so it really has changed. And I think that goes to the point here, right? That you can try and argue that what you're seeing is not what you think you're seeing, but it's pretty difficult. We do believe what we see, and you see this brutality. I think that it's really made a huge difference, and that's because capitalism put all of these cameras in people's hands. So, Elise, we're gonna leave the last question or comment to you. So,
what's next, Mark?
Well, I do want to say that the film's virtual release will be on May Day at Argo Pictures, and let's see, I'm not sure how to. Bad self-promoter here. The link is somewhere.
We'll put it in the show notes. We got you covered.
Thank you very much. By the way, just very quickly, I wrote an article I can share with you called "Street Photography in the Age of the iPhone," and the premise of it, it's the Filmmaker magazine. I'll send it to you. But the premise is that people are at once that the mechanism for creating images is ubiquitous, more ubiquitous than it was, but people are more paranoid about their images,
right?
As well, it's sort of a double-edged sword, know. And a lot of times I get asked, "What are you doing? What is this for? What are you doing?" and things like that. And I think it's because everybody's snapping more photos and they're more afraid about where they're going to end up and things like that. But at least you generously asked me what's next. I have a sabbatical coming up. I like to go to strange places and film and let the films or the ideas of the film emanate from those strange places. So I want to go way north in Scotland to the oil fields and, Dundee and places like that. I have sabbatical coming up. And I just want to start with the location and then maybe consider the notion of Scottish independence in relation to oil, because I don't want to speak for all people who are pushing for Scottish independence, but some are pro-oil because that's where the money comes from.
Sure.
To create that thing. So it's an interesting mix of, nationalism and, sort of almost tribal pride or something, and I guess anti-environmentalism in some ways. So I don't know what the film will say yet. I don't know what I'll say as an outsider, but I'm intrigued by oil derricks, as always, by industrial and post-industrial landscapes, and I'll start there and interview people along the way and see where it heads.
Perfect. Well, when you get back, let us know. We'll have you back on. We're going to want to get a debrief on that.
Love to.
Absolutely.
It's really great. This really made my day. It's a great conversation with you both. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for joining us, Mark. Take care.
Bye-bye, Mark.
Nice
Thank
to see
you.
both. Take care.